For this insight or foolish discussion, I turn to Kozmos, most notably due to their performance at the North American World Championship qualifier, though this point has been bugging me for a while now. I'm well versed in all of the meta decks, both playing them and playing against them, and in my opinion Kozmos is the superior deck among the big four, bundling both Monarchs and Burning Abyss together among the different variants. Yet Kozmos does not seem to win at the level that they should. How can the best deck in the format only win 6 spots in the top 64 instead of 20 plus like Burning Abyss? Why has it performed so poorly at general YCSs? Where is this gap between theory and reality? To possibly explain this gap, I turn to the insightful or foolish statement for Kozmos. The quality of the Kozmo archetype and the deck builds overall have been significantly negatively handicapped by the inclusion of Kozmo Tin Can. Wait, what was that? One of the 3 Kozmo cards, in addition to Dark Destroyer and Kozmo Town, that a vast majority of Kozmo players think should be run at 3 is actually bad for the deck? That's crazy. Tin Can's a great card, right? During the end phase, select 3 different named Kozmo cards from the deck. Then your opponent randomly selects 1 card for you to add to your hand, and the remaining 2 are sent to the graveyard. That's an automatic +1 during every end phase, yours or your opponent's. It can thin the deck, and it sets up your turn during your opponent's turn because it's a pilot that can jump out of the way if you add a ship, which is almost always guaranteed because standard practice is to send 3 ships, thus its 0 attack points are no real form of liability outside of those times when its effect is negated. How can this card be hurting Kozmos? All decks have principal characteristics based on their archetype card traits and how they're built. Kozmos is an OTK power deck first and foremost. Is it the best OTK deck in the game? I would argue no. But unlike other prominent OTK decks like Mermails and Fluffles, for example, Kozmos has very strong field control elements as well. In fact, I would argue that Kozmos is probably the only deck in the game that can be viewed as a Tier 1 OTK deck and a Tier 1 control deck. But its true strength is as an OTK power deck with control elements. Its strength do not lie as a control deck with OTK elements. However, that role reversal is exactly what has happened thanks to Tin Can. Yes, Tin Can produces a +1, but at what cost? It commonly results in 2 of your higher attack point monsters, your ships, hitting the graveyard, for risking a Kozmo spell and trap card is typically foolish, except in rare circumstances when you need to roll the proverbial dice. This loss of your ships is clearly a negative, because the natural flow and synergy of Kozmos involve hand to field to banish zone, where graveyard visitation is extremely limited when the deck is running properly. Tin Can changed that synergy, creating significant waste for the +1. In fact, in isolation, despite the +1, Tin Can actually significantly lowers the OTK power and field control power of Kozmos. The OTK power loss will be discussed later, but field control power is lost because each time Tin Can is used, a possible 2 monsters most of the time that could be put on the field after a ship's destruction are lost. So instead of having that Slip Rider, Forerunner, or Landwalker ready to summon after the destruction of a higher level ship, it's sitting in the graveyard doing nothing. To counter this waste, players started running Call of the Haunted and or Oasis of Dragon's Soul, because heck, Dark Destroyer gets its effect when special summoned, not just when special summoned by a Kozmo effect, so players convinced themselves that generic revival was good for the deck. Except, how is it good for the deck? As stated, the natural synergy of Kozmos focuses on going from the hand to the field to the banish zone, generally skipping permanents in the graveyard, whereas generic revival really only focus on the graveyard. Most of the time in a Kozmo deck, draw a generic revival without drawing a Tin Can, it's a dead draw. Furthermore, in the desire to chase that +1, due to the new control strategy, some players even started running Pot of Duality. And then they started running Card of Demise when it came out. Wait a second. Both of these cards eliminate the ability to special summon on the turn they are activated, whereas Kozmos are a very special summon heavy deck, especially when going for those OTKs and higher damage plays in general. Special summoning is how Kozmos produce most of their on-field advantage, and now players are running cards that restrict special summoning. What is this, Bizarro World? Some may argue that due to the quick play pilot effect, losing the ability to special summon during the Kozmo player's turn because of a Pot of Duality or Card of Demise is not significant, because it can be done during the opponent's turn if danger exists. There is some validity to this point with regards to Pot of Duality, but obviously not a Card of Demise, because you won't have any monsters to summon during your opponent's turn. But what happens if special summoning is needed on that turn? Basically, what happens if it's not the first turn? So the switch to a more control grindy deck away from the OTK power leads to more inefficiency. The somewhat hidden detriment of this shift in Kozmo strategy from OTK power to field control is that loss of overall consistency. Tin Cans, Generic Revival, Maxis, Card of Demises, and even Pot of Dualities and Dark Ladies take away from Kozmo's strengths as a fast-hitting bully deck by replacing cards that promoted that strength, like more copies of Farm Girl. I will forever be confused why people run decks without 3 copies of Farm Girl. She's a +1 machine too, and a better one most of the time than Tin Can when the build is right, because she can actually reliably get Cosmojo and Cosmotown if needed. More copies of Wicked Witch. Wicked Witch is actually the best control card in the Kozmo arsenal, and she's almost never run at 3, and only rarely at 2. Honest, Torrential Tributes, Instant Fusions, and even Moon Mirror Shields. Not only is the OTK capacity of Kozmos heavily neutered by these changes, but also its dead draw potential significantly increases, especially for the first few turns, the most important part of the duel. Shocker that as time has progressed, and this new control version has taken over in popularity, Kozmo bricking percentage has seemingly increased. Some try to suggest that Tin Can helps OTK probability because of its searching ability. Add that chip or Farm Girl, but even at best, Tin Can still forces a 1-turn wait before an OTK can be launched. Also, this less efficient Kozmo build is all the more depressing because Cosmojo and Landwalker are really high-quality support cards within the next generation of support that are rendered less effective by the control build. To be clear, I'm not saying that Kozmos can't win with Tin Can in the build. I'm just saying that you run Tin Can, you have a lower probability of winning versus if you don't run Tin Can, and design accordingly. One could also question the discrepancy between the number of Kozmo Top 64s in the NAWCQ and the European World Championship qualifier, for in Europe, the various different variants of Kozmos amassed many more spots in the Top 64 over the depressing 6 from the NAWCQ. However, outside of various random intangible factors that could sway these changes, the best single explanation for this difference is the fact that Europe does not have Utopia the Lightning available for competitive play. Lightning is a nightmare card for Kozmos, especially the control version, which runs fewer monsters and tends to have more difficulty recovering. Some may argue that if Tin Can free OTK Kozmo is superior to Tin Can Kozmo, where are all the tops by Tin Can free Kozmo? My counter-argument would be most players have been persuaded that Tin Can Control Kozmo is the superior deck by trends or famous players, thus people don't play OTK Kozmos at the level that would demonstrate its superiority over Tin Can Kozmo. So, the moral of the story: don't run Tin Can in your Kozmo decks, because to ensure its efficiency, you have to change the deck strategy from OTK power with strong field control to field control with moderate OTK power. In my opinion, and seemingly in practice, this overall strategy change actually lowers the probability of Kozmo victory. Oddly enough, despite this supposed decrease in efficiency and victory probability, the control build for Kozmos has soared in popularity. Interesting. That concludes my insightful or foolish discussion regarding Kozmos. So the real question remains: am I insightful by recognizing that detrimental advantage chasing has allowed Kozmo Tin Can to infiltrate Kozmo deck builds as a saboteur of sorts, hurting the deck more than helping it? Or am I foolish for holding on to the past, not recognizing that Kozmos needed to evolve to survive against the other meta decks? Well, we all know where I stand. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.